I remembered the incident I'm about to tell you about after a recent meeting with an acquaintance. He was the main character in the events described, but we hadn't seen each other for a while. If he hadn't called out to me first, I would have passed him by without even acknowledging him. Anyway, first things first. Vitya was a guy in his 30s. We first met a couple of years ago in a hospital ward. I went to visit a sick friend. Vitya was lying in the next bed. He looked incredibly unwell back then. He looked like a yellowed mummy with sunken cheeks and eyes bulging from dark circles. He spent all his time lying horizontally. Only occasionally would he sit hunched over on the edge of the hospital bed, sipping some tea and washing down another pill. He ate practically nothing, as he had no appetite at all. But he couldn't clearly explain to the doctors what exactly was hurting, because, according to him, it was aching all over, and an overwhelming weakness was felt throughout his body. A week later, when I went to pick up my friend from the hospital, I noticed a change in his neighbor's appearance. Vitya had completely withered away. It was impossible to look at his withered remains without shuddering. However, the guy was also being discharged home. Routine is routine. He spent 10 days in hospital, let the next patient rest. Besides, in contrast to his depressing appearance, the test results didn't paint a particularly bad picture. On the way home, my friend told Vitya a story. He worked security at one of Yekaterinburg's major business centers. I won't specify which one, so as not to spread unnecessary rumors. For the first few months, everything went well. But one day, Vitya started his 24-hour shift with a severe hangover. The fact that it was Sunday made things a little easier. Almost all the offices were locked, and clerks and visitors were few and far between. It was easy enough to wait for the hangover to clear its lid. But somehow, neither lunchtime nor evening improved Vitya's condition. On the contrary, the darker it got outside the stained glass windows of the business center, the worse he felt. It felt as if his entire body was swaddled in a black sheet. His lungs were short of air, his heart was pounding wildly, and his muscles were completely weak and aching. Vitya couldn't understand what was happening to him. That night, when the business center had finally fallen silent and still, the security guard tried to take a nap, but it didn't work. Lying down made things even worse. An inexplicable terror descended upon him. It was as if death itself had come and stood behind him, waiting for the moment to swing its scythe. Vitya himself couldn't remember how he managed to get through the morning shift change. He limped home, half bent, and collapsed into bed, completely exhausted. Fortunately, he immediately fell into a deep sleep, and when he woke up, he felt much better. Over the next 3 days, he completely recovered. Deciding it was the effects of alcohol poisoning, he soon forgot all about the unpleasant sensations. However, when he started his shift that morning, he began to notice, with surprise and concern, a growing weakness inside and a familiar feeling of tightness and suffocation. What was this obsession? After a couple of hours of suffering, he took the elevator to the upper floors for work-related reasons. And then, strangely enough, he felt better. Vitya almost calmed down, but as soon as he went down to the security room, the black shroud enveloped his body again. In addition, he developed an eerie feeling of an invisible presence nearby. It felt as if this invisible presence was following his every step, as if sucking his life force dry. By the end of his 24-hour shift, Vitya, although not as devastated as the previous time, still felt like a squeezed lemon. This happened constantly now. He looked forward to each shift with dread. Going to work felt like going to hard labor. Furthermore, his sleep became restless. He had nightmares that would wake him up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Because of all this, Vitya lost a significant amount of weight. He became silent and withdrawn. Even the slightest bit of negative information, like crime reports on the TV news, immediately made him feel ill. Not to mention his personal troubles. Those drove him to complete despair. He suffered like this for a month or two, until his mother finally noticed alarming changes in her son's appearance and personality. Since he flatly refused to go to the hospital, she practically forced Vitya to see a traditional healer. It's unclear how competent the psychic was, but this is what he said. The young man's protective aura has been almost completely destroyed. This has severely damaged his biofield. The recovery process will be long and difficult, but the homegrown healer couldn't pinpoint what triggered the destruction of Vitya's protective aura. He advised me to attend church more often and sign up for his sessions. As far as I could tell, Vitya dutifully attended the scheduled, expensive sessions, taking time off specifically for this purpose, and he even seemed to feel better. But as soon as he returned to work, everything started all over again. And I didn't want to quit my good job, especially since he'd been promoted, appointed shift supervisor or something like that. In the end, the poor guy ended up in a hospital bed, in the inpatient ward, with a diagnosis that was still unclear. That's where I first saw him. And so, when we met again 2 years later, I was pleasantly surprised to notice a striking change in Vitya's appearance. He wasn't exactly a new man, of course, but there was no trace left of his former mummy. In response to my legitimate questions, Vitya revealed the rest of his story. After his hospital stay, he returned to work at that ill-fated business center. And gradually, he noticed the following pattern. His condition worsened on the ground floors, and especially in the basement. When he reached the top, he immediately felt relief. It was also easier during the day, on weekdays, when there were large crowds. At night and on deserted weekends, the oppressive darkness descended with redoubled force. Unwittingly, this topic began to surface more and more frequently in his conversations with colleagues and acquaintances. And then one day, someone shared information that sent shivers down Vitya's spine. They said that the site of the business center had once been either an old cemetery or an ancient burial ground. It hadn't been moved during the building's construction, but simply bulldozed over. Whether this was true is difficult to say now, but then One of the security guards present at the conversation immediately recalled seeing strange phantom figures in the deserted corridors at night. However, it was all ultimately dismissed as a joke. Vitya alone was in no mood for laughter. The young man seriously believed that the black veil that disturbed him every time he was in the building and the story of the ancient burial site desecrated by the builders were inextricably linked. Even though he himself hadn't seen any ghosts or phantoms, after weighing the pros and cons, he quit his promising job. From then on, he never set foot in the fatal building again. He even tried to stay away. Whether this was the reason or not, after a short time, Vitya finally recovered. He grew stronger, forgetting all his ailments, his loss of appetite, and his gloomy mood. He became his former energetic and cheerful self. I don't think everything that happened to my friend can be explained by self-deception and self-hypnosis. I know there really are people who are quite susceptible to external influences. Invisible, I mean. Around us, in addition to the known forms of energy, there are also those whose nature remains unexplained. Therefore, it's possible that Vitya was right about something. And most importantly, everything ended well for him this time.